You're here because you're a real estate agent and being educated on your profession is important to you. This video is going to help you further understand the Information About Brokerage Services document, or the IABS. And I'm also going to give you some pointers on how you can explain this document very truthfully. It's going to help you get buyer representation agreements signed. My name is Jeremy Smith. This is Living an Epic Life in Real Estate. If you're looking for education on real estate documents here in the state of Texas, you've come to the right place. We've got several other documents explained in very thorough detail here on the channel, so search for them. 1 to 4 purchase contract is on here, third-party financing addendum, and some of the other most common documents that you will need will be here. So subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you get notification when we post more content, and look through, get educated on these documents so that you can be much more effective when representing clients. All right, guys, well, let's go ahead and jump right into the IABS. All right, guys, so this is the Information About Brokerage Services. At the top, it says Texas law requires all real estate license holders to give the following information about brokerage services to prospective buyers, tenants, sellers, and landlords. It says give it to them. I highly recommend you explain it to them. Most people aren't going to read this, so they're not going to really understand. Even if they do, they may have questions that they're not asking you. So if you want to set yourself up as the trusted, knowledgeable professional in their eyes, and you can explain this document the way I'm going to show you, you are going to win a lot more business. And that goes the same for the rest of the document. So again, get educated on it, learn how to explain them, and watch your business blow up. So at the top of this document, it talks about the types of real estate license holders that exist in the state of Texas. There's only 2. You're either a broker or you're a salesperson. A broker is responsible for all of the activities, including acts performed by sales agents that are sponsored by the broker. A sales agent must be sponsored by a broker and works with clients on behalf of the broker. So you're gonna say that, hey, my client's this and my client's that. Yeah, they're really not your clients. They're clients of the brokerage, right? If you leave the brokerage, they may require those clients to stay. So just understand that they are your clients, you're working with them, but technically they're clients of the brokerage. You represent the brokerage. And from here on out, when you hear the word brokerage used in this document, it's describing you as representing these folks. So next paragraph talks about the broker's minimum duties that are required by law. So then it says a client is the person or party that the broker represents. First thing you got to do, put the interest of the client above all others, including the broker's own interest. So no commission breath, right? Get rid of that shit and make sure that you're putting their interest first. Inform the client of any material information about the property or the transaction that you get. If the other side tells you stuff, pass that information along. Whether they do something about it, you'll find out. But you got to pass the information along. There should be nothing that you know that they don't. Third, answer the client's questions and present any offers to or counter offer from the client. So if you're going back and forth in negotiations and you get something that you think is totally ridiculous, you do have to go give that information to your client, right? Whether you're on the buy side or the sell side, doesn't matter. If you have information about the property, you got to give it to them, or information about the offers, the negotiation. You've got to pass that information on. Remember, there should be nothing that you know about the transaction or the property that your client doesn't. And lastly, treat all parties to the real estate transaction honestly and fairly. Now that's a big one, guys, because that means you've got to be honest and fair with the other side as well. This is not just about your client. This is about everybody. It says all parties. So you've got to be honest, you've got to be fair to the agent on the other side, the lender if you're representing the seller if you're representing the buyer. Like, you've got to be honest and work with integrity and treat everybody fairly. Minimum duties, guys. Those are the minimum duties. I highly recommend you go well above that, but that's just minimum to keep your license. So a license holder can represent a party in a real estate transaction in a few ways. One is working for an owner. So this paragraph says that the broker becomes a property owner's agent through an agreement with the owner, usually a written listing to sell or property management agreement. The owner's agent must perform the broker's minimum duties above and must inform the owner of any material information about the property or the transaction known by the agent, including information disclosed to the agent or sub-agent. Now remember, we're going to come back to sub-agency, or sub-agent by the buyer or the buyer's agent, right? So anything that you find out, if you're the listing agent, regardless of how you found it out, you got to give it to your client. Now, when you're working with the buyer, the broker will become the buyer's or tenant's agent by agreeing to represent the buyer, usually through a written representation agreement. A buyer's agent must perform the broker's minimum duties above and must inform the buyer of any material information about the property or the transaction known by the agent, including information disclosed to the agent by the seller or the seller's agent. So very similar to the other relationship with the seller, you got to disclose anything that you hear, right? Regardless of the source, you got to disclose it to your client. Again, you should not know anything that they don't. Pass the information along. And then we have intermediary. So intermediary, just to sum it up, if you're not aware, intermediary is when one brokerage is working with both buyer and seller in a transaction, right? So there's some rules and some ways to do this, and this is what it says. So to act as an intermediary between the parties, the broker has to first get the agreement of both of the parties, right? So buyer and seller have to agree to enter into this intermediary relationship. They got to do it in writing, and the written agreement must state who will pay the broker, and in conspicuous, bold, or underlined print set forth the broker's obligations as an intermediary, which that form does. And then a broker who acts as an intermediary must follow these few steps. 1, treat all parties to the transaction impartially and fairly. Second time we've heard fairly. They may, with the party's written consent, appoint a different license holder associated with the broker to each party. So maybe the seller gets their agent and the buyer gets a separate agent, but they're just both from the same brokerage. And they're there to communicate with, provide opinions and advice to, and carry out the instructions of each party to the transaction. Now they don't have to, right? It says may, so one agent could handle the whole transaction with buyer and seller. At that point, they really don't represent either. They're just there to guide, right? It's a whole different ball game there. So if you're getting yourself into that, talk with your broker, your team leader, or hit me up and I can give you some advice on that as well. I've done that several times. Also, they must not, unless specifically authorized in writing to do so by the party, disclose that the owner will accept a price less than what they're listed at, disclose that the buyer will pay a price more than what they offered, or any other confidential information or any other information that a party specifically instructs the broker in writing not to disclose, unless required by law to do so. So those are your limitations when it comes to intermediary. Now, we hit on sub-agency a little bit earlier, but I want to bring that back, and I actually like to end my explanation of this form in our buyer consultations with sub-agency, and you guys are going to see why. It helps you get more buyer representation agreements signed. It just makes sense. So a sub-agent. So what is a sub-agent? It says a license holder acts as a sub-agent when aiding a buyer in a transaction without an agreement to represent the buyer. A sub-agent can assist the buyer, but does not represent that buyer and must place the interest of the owner first. The example I like to give is, let's say you, Mr. Buyer, go into an open house and there's an agent in this open house. You just met this agent, never seen her before, and she's very nice. You ask her to write an offer for you. There's no attempt at a buyer representation agreement because she, in fact, maybe is with the brokerage that represents the seller, or she is the listing agent, or whatever the situation may be. You don't have a buyer rep agreement to sign with her, and you ask her to write the offer, and you tell her, hey, I know they're asking $300,000 for the home. We would pay $300,000, but let's start at $280,000. Okay, now if you remember back in the section where it describes what an agent who works for a seller has to do, when it speaks about giving all the information that you have, including information disclosed to the agent or sub-agent by the buyer or buyer's agent. So you've just disclosed to the sub-agent that you would pay a price more than what you're going to offer. And they have, since there's not an intermediary here, they've got to go back and disclose that to the seller. There's no intermediary and they don't represent you, so their obligation is to the seller. That is why, Mr. Buyer, it's very important that you have somebody who represents you through a written representation agreement that creates that fiduciary responsibility. Okay, so that's how I explain that part to potential buyers. Then, to avoid disputes, all agreements should be in writing. The broker's duties and responsibilities to you and your obligations are under the representation agreement. Who will pay the broker for services provided to you, when payment will be made, and how the payment will be calculated. So that's addressed in the buyer rep agreement, also in the MLS, also in the purchase contract. License holder contact information. So then you have your brokerage name, your designated broker for your state, your designated supervisor, maybe the same person, your name, all of y'all's license numbers, your email addresses and phone numbers, and then your prospect, whether it's buyer, seller, tenant, or landlord, must initial at the bottom, acknowledging that they received this information, and then put the date on next to it. Now again, guys, I highly recommend you don't just give this to them and say, hey, these are documents you need to sign. When I see agents doing that, it's usually because those agents don't understand the documents and they haven't taken the time to learn them, so they don't want to take the time to try to explain them because their explanation is going to be poo-poo. So don't be that agent. Study this document. It's only one page, guys. It's not that hard to learn this, be able to intelligently explain this to your clients. It's going to set you up for a lot of success. So again, guys, check out the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Let me know what questions or feedback you have. If there are any other documents you would like for me to explain that are not on the channel, reach out. But otherwise, y'all have a good one. Live an epic life in real estate, and I'll see you next time. Peace.